Welcome to the Spoon Podcast, where we talk to the builders and makers on the front lines of the food tech revolution. I'm your host, Michael Wolf. Today's guests are Eric Dawson of the Yellow Farmhouse and Rich Shih, author of Koji Alchemy. And they join me to talk about their online event happening this week and next, Kojicon. I spent some time this week enjoying some of the sessions, and if you've ever wanted to dive deep into the world of fermentation, Koji, if you want to understand how it's being used across the world, the history of it, and it's such a rich history, this is your event. Tickets are super affordable, starting at $50, and you get access to all the sessions, both this past week and past years, as well as participate in next week's live sessions. And again, I've been watching and listening this week and really enjoying it. I encourage you to do so as well. You can go to kojicon.org and buy a ticket. So what are you waiting for? Eric and Rich and I talk about the history of Kojicon. We also talk about the history of fermentation and how it all got started. So it's a fun conversation. I hope you enjoy it. I will have another episode of the Spoon Podcast out this weekend, so stay tuned for that. And we've got some amazing shows on the Spoon Podcast Network, including Food Truths, where host Eric Schulze and his guest, food policy journalist Helena Boatmiller-Evich, talk about what the heck is going on at the FDA with RFK Jr. And on the podcast, Maybe Food, Maybe Tech, they go deep into microplastics, the AI opportunity, and what's happening with Gen Z slang. Check it out. Subscribe. You'll be glad you did. All right, folks, let's get to my conversation with Eric and Rich. Welcome to the show, Eric and Rich.
Thank you so much for having us.
Fermentation is one of my favorite topics. We write about it quite a bit at the Spoon, and this is one of those areas where you guys are diving deep into the culture of it, the technology of it, and where it's all going. Before we get to the themes you guys are exploring, I'd love to hear a little bit about this, how this whole thing got started. Rich, I think you were there at the beginning, brainstorming a little bit on what this thing would be. How did that whole thing, the whole idea behind Kojicon start?
So I'd been investigating Koji for several years with my colleague who I wrote a book with called Koji Alchemy. And I sort of reached out to Jen in terms of having a conference at the Yellow Farmhouse to investigate, just sort of get some experts together and gather some people in person. But unfortunately, the pandemic hit us, and we're sort of in a space where we still wanted to follow through with the idea, but obviously could not meet in person. So we just decided on putting together something really quickly. Jen had some thoughts about, doing, something digitally for, just to have people present. And then we could sort of expand internationally in terms of our participants and presenters. And we put together a pretty healthy list of folks, around the order of 30, who are experts in their field in Koji and mold-based fermentation. And we posted out. We're hoping to get maybe 100 tickets sold, and we actually got, right around 1,000. It was pretty amazing.
And that high number was kind of surprising. Did it tell you something about maybe the interest in this topic? What do you think there was the reason there was so much interest there?
I think there was a thirst for interaction with the lack of interaction due to the fact that people could not get together, but also just the fact that Koji and mold-based fermentation is very transformative in terms of the flavors and, the depth and the breadth of things that you can transform from very simple cuts of meat to simply, simple vegetables or anything that you would consume that you would normally feel as plain can be quite flavorful. For example, if we think about how soy sauce is made, all the constituent ingredients are very simple. It's soybeans, toasted cracked wheat, salt, and water. And if you think about anybody who has culinary background or who can cook really well, given those ingredients, it's really difficult to make something super complex and tasty. When you apply Koji to it, you create soy sauce. And essentially all you do is put the ingredients together, have this microbe do its magic, and the fermentation happens over the course of the year. And you literally just stir it every now and then over the course of the season, and it becomes this amazing complex flavor and highly nutritious that is the base for a lot of condiments in Asia.
And Eric, you just told me, I think before we started, that you do like 30 interviews or so per Kojicon. What have you learned over the past 5 years? I think this is going to be the 5th one in 2025. What are some of the things you've noticed over the past couple of years?
Yeah. So over the past few years, I've been able to host it's really large number of different presentations, and meet so many different interesting people from all over the world. All of the different ways that not only has like koji and other mold-based ferments, not only how have they been like used throughout history and all like the history that goes along with them. Like this is something that Rich says, but like without fermentation, like we wouldn't really be here today. It was a building block for so much of our like food history over time. So you're seeing how people are able to like articulate how that fermentation history has like impacted them has been really enlightening to see, and also all the unique and interesting ways that people are using fermentation to sort of like break down new barriers and create like unique and innovative products has been really cool to see.
Rich, you said that fermentation is partially responsible for us being here as a human race. Explain a little bit. What do you mean there?
So, as humans, we needed to find ways to preserve food, and essentially, microbes, these, super tiny beings, consume the same food that we do. And what they do is they break down food for us and make it more bioavailable. And through these preservation processes with fermentation, they create acidity, alcohol in such ways that it preserves food for us. So if we didn't have these microbes helping us in the ways of us, sort of symbiotically working with them, we wouldn't necessarily have good ways to preserve food or make it safe for us to eat back in the day when we didn't really understand what was going on. And more of what was happening, it was just sort of happenstance or trial and error of things that, if we ate something and, it happened to be a little bit sour and sitting around, but, all the, sort of pathogenic microbes didn't take hold, and, you had a community that continued to survive. Or if you ate something that was bad, it was like, oh, let's not eat that.
Rich, I know you've written a book on it. Do you have any idea how like people did that first fermentation? How people discovered this?
Oh, I think so. If we can talk simply about fruit, when fruit sort of falls from a tree and it's super ripe, you start to see the fermentation and taste the fermentation, the lacto fermentation, the alcohol fermentation. So all these things occur in such a way that by default it's preserving the fruit as you go along.
It's happening in nature before even man gets involved.
Yeah, and that's some of the things that we start to detect in our taste buds, right? We detect this umami, right? Umami is the broken down, it's the amino acids of protein. So knowing those amino acids have been broken down of the protein, it's protein. Or when you taste sugar, essentially that the starches have been broken down. And then that there's nutrition in this food because of how we taste.
And so over time, people experimented and it became an integral part, used at the highest part of the culinary art. I just talked last week with Kevin Jung from the probably the most famous restaurant in the world, Noma. So you guys have a great lineup of speakers exploring all the different aspects, including things like how AI is going to impact it. So Eric, can you talk a little bit about the different themes you're exploring this year?
Yeah, so our theme for this year is tradition meets transformation. So the main idea with that is, sort of paying respects to all of these ancient practices that have been used for so long, all of these traditional things that have been passed on from generation to generation, whether written or orally, and finding ways to pay homage to those. While also honoring koji and just like fermentation's ability in general as a way to sort of transform food into these new unique ways that are, I think really going to be beneficial for the future. And it's not just like using koji to transform food. We're talking about like food waste, like precision fermentation as a way to reduce the amount of food waste that we're generating. All of these sorts of things are getting transformed through koji and fermentation. So we're trying to dive into all of that this year. I think we have a really good lineup of presenters who are going to be able to do just that.
And it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, you guys have evolved to a certain degree, because I think originally it was all mold-based fermentation. And when I look at for example, precision fermentation, which we write a lot about at the Spoon. It's a little bit higher tech. It's at the foundation of a lot of these next generation food inputs. Has the agenda evolved to incorporate a kind of more broad look at fermentation, or is it still primarily focused on mold-based fermentation?
So we originally started as Koji fermentation.
From Koji fermentation.
Yeah, the Japanese focus where they take a specific microbe. The one that everybody and is most popular is Aspergillus oryzae. So the Japanese back in the day were pretty innovative in the way of being able to isolate a microbe, which is really impressive. So they took wood ash and they just kept on feeding their microbial sort of mother with wood ash, and through the alkalinity, they were able to isolate this single microbe to be able to create these really pure flavors with this microbe. Whereas pretty much all of Asia and the rest of the world did not isolate. They did more wild fermentation. So would have all different types of beneficial molds and also lacto-fermentation and yeast fermentation. So it's a little more sort of like liberal or natural or wild mother versus what the Japanese did to isolate. So once we sort of started going to the Japanese methodology and starting to explain it, because it's the easiest for people to get started to learn this type of fermentation, then we extended into folks who knew more about, Korean and Chinese, Taiwanese fermentation that involved more of the wild or natural ferments that incorporate a wider variety of microbes. So we've extended into more of a general mold-based fermentation. There is talk of, the adjunct fermentation that happens with it, which is, your typical lacto fermentation, yeast fermentation, and acetobacter for vinegar fermentation. So we sort of like work into all of how this mold-based fermentation allows you to do all these other ferments. But essentially the mold-based fermentation creates the sugars from the starches to be able to extend into your more commonly understood fermentation.
The organization behind this is a number of folks, but also it's the Yellow Farmhouse. Can you tell us a little bit about that organization?
Yeah, so the Yellow Farmhouse Education Center, we're a small nonprofit based in southeastern Connecticut. So the mission of the Yellow Farmhouse is to connect people to each other and to where their food comes from through culinary and farm-based education. So we do this through a number of different avenues. We do a lot of professional development workshops for culinary teachers. We do a lot of curriculum development for culinary classes. We are based on a beautiful farm, so we like to bring people to the farm. So we do that through field trips, different public events like cooking classes, adult workshops, those types of things. And then one of the main things that we do is run Kojicon, which is sort of a perfect embodiment of our mission. We're connecting people to each other virtually all over the world, and we're bringing people together over culinary education. So Kojicon and the Yellow Farmhouse sort of go hand in hand.
Awesome. And where can people find out more about Kojicon? Is it just kojicon.org?
Yeah, so you can head over to kojicon.org, so you can get tickets over there. And you can also check out our Instagram. We're at koji.con on Instagram. You can follow us there and see all the updates throughout the conference.
All right. Well, I'm excited to spend some time with you guys in the next couple of weeks, digging deep into the world of fermentation. Rich Shih and Eric Dawson, thank you very much, guys.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, this was really exciting to be part of, and we look forward to seeing what you will make with Koji.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Eric and Rich. If you haven't checked out Kojicon yet, go to kojicon.org, check it out, and buy a ticket. Please rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really does help. If you like the stories and the conversations and the people we'll talk to on the Spoon podcast, you'll love what you find on the Spoon Podcast Network. So I encourage you to check it out, subscribe to shows, and we just appreciate your support. All right, folks, thank you very much. We'll talk to y'all soon.
If you enjoyed this episode, why not share it with a friend? And don't forget to give us a 5-star review. You'll find more content like this on thespoon.tech/podcasts.